I'm Anthony Asher, and I'm sort of convening these colloquies as representative on behalf of the Research Council Committee. For those who haven't been before, the idea is that instead of having presentations and interrogating experts, we should have the opportunity to express our own opinions and rub them against each other. So I hope that we have really open and forthright conversation. So my job is really to keep the show on the road. Today we have an interesting topic and a lot of experts, all of whom you probably would want to interrogate. So it's going to be a little difficult. Firstly, I need to say that this has been inspired by Rob Payton, and he's done almost all the work on this score. Rob's previous convener of both the super and health practice committees of the Institute, and he says he's really involved in intergenerational issues because he has parents and grandchildren, and everyone in between.
And children, sometimes.
And children, yes. So we actually share that, which maybe got something to do with the story. Then we have also Danielle Wood from the Grattan Institute here. So she was one of the co-authors of the two papers that Rob has circulated. So really good to have you here, Danielle, and I hope we won't give you too hard an interrogation. He'll be saying something at various stages. And we've got Robert Ewing from Commonwealth Treasury, who was the team leader of the Intergenerational report. So again, we could spend probably 2 hours interrogating. But it's really good to have visitors along, and we hope you will find the conversation interesting and be able to guide the Institute in what you have to say. So the other sort of special guests are Michael Rice, who is convener of the Policy Practice Committee of the Institute currently. So the
Public policy
is the expert and leader of the Actuaries Institute's initiatives in that area. And Sophie Dyson, who's you're also on the Public Policy Committee.
I was.
You were, okay.
We're more than health practice.
So, yeah, she health practice, particularly interested in the health area. So, plus, welcome all the rest of you, all of whom have interests and things to say in this area. Can I just say, it's quite interesting for an intergenerational report when we wanted to get help young members of the Institute find a voice. But the young members are relatively limited. Which says,
chat loud.
Yes. And so, but I do want to just encourage you to say something earlier rather than later. Last time, Cameron, you opened your mouth 10 minutes before the end, and it was a pity because you had a lot to say at that. So, with all that, let's get started. I'm going to ask Rob to say a few words, and then Michael will be saying a few words, and then Sophie will be saying a few words, and then we'll get the discussion going. But that shouldn't take more than 10 minutes in total.
Thanks, Anthony. Special welcome to you, Rob. Thank you very much for coming. The Actuaries Institute has a long history of working with the government, based around our competence, our impartiality, and our code of conduct. And we perform very important roles for the government from the early 1990s. I put some pieces of paper on your chairs because there were a number of things that came out after my introduction was written. My introduction was written predominantly in December 2014. The first one is the IGR 15, and the initial page is page 51, which shows the primary cash balance from the intergenerational report. I didn't know about Rob's role before I photocopied this stuff for you, but it's fantastic to have him here. So Rob, please make your comments on this as it comes through. My conclusion from this is the primary cash balance, which excludes interest on debt. And if you look at the currently legislated line, you can see in my terms that the Commonwealth Government has substantially addressed its short-term budget issue based on the primary cash balance, up till around about 24, 25, and then it deteriorates after that stage. If you go over to the second page, page 47, you can then see where interest is allowed, and this is the figure that's been quoted in the press quite frequently, that in 2054-55 that there'll be a deficit of 6% of GDP based on currently legislated programs. So that's what's been used. But you see, even then, we get up to zero in the earlier years, and then the position deteriorates. One of the things, obviously, about the IGR is its assumptions, its sensitivities, particularly around productivity. And the very important thing that you need to understand and take account of in assessing the IGR is that different methods have been used to project Commonwealth share of health spending. This is only the Commonwealth share of health spending. There has been a substantial change made by the Commonwealth in the funding of Commonwealth special purpose grants to the states from the 2017 financial year through to the late 2020s, and essentially increases in those grants have been assumed as just CPI plus population growth, to the extent that it appears from the IGR that Commonwealth Government payments for health increased at only 0.7% per annum real, in contrast to the historical nearly 3%. After these projections of health spending after the late 2020s then morph into a more traditional sort of rate of increase of up around the 3% per annum amount. So hence you've got this deterioration that occurs. Now the second thing that came out more recently was it's the third page that's in front of you with my handwriting on the top, A&U, a stock take of the tax system and directions for reform. And I've just photocopied page 36 here, and the important thing here is that it has the largest tax expenditures in personal income tax, listed there, obviously in order of magnitude. So worth taking into account, and you'll see at the top, obviously, the main residence and superannuation being after the main residence. The other very interesting thing that's happened since the notes were prepared, the introduction was prepared, is there's been a speech by John Fraser, who is the new Secretary of the Treasury. It was on the 27th of February 2015. If you just go to the Treasury website, you'll see that speech. It's definitely worth reading. I just want to highlight two quick things. On page 9, Mr. Fraser says, the reality is that Australia has spent its way to a structural budget problem. Government payments are growing faster than government revenues, and without action, this trend will continue. And on page 10, Mr. Fraser says, my view is that we need to address Australia's structural budget problem through greater expenditure restraint, where the international experience shows what can be achieved over relatively short time periods. Expenditure restraint there. My introduction, I guess you've all had a look at. There are three questions that are raised on page 1. I won't go through them. The second question probably could have been better added to, or to address proven intergenerational inequity. In other words, changes to public policies. As the note says, even if we were in balance, it may be that there should be changes to public policy to move money, move support from older Australians to, in my thesis, more productive younger Australians. And at the end, I say making public policy change on page 4, there are 3 practical suggestions that I make there. So Anthony, I'm sorry I've taken a little bit too much time, but that's what I would like to say.
No, thanks, Rob, and feel free to interject later when you when you're misinterpreted.
I will be taking notes of what people are saying. This session is being recorded. I'll provide my notes to Michael and to Sophie, and they will be used for institute purposes. There's no need, as far as I know, Anthony, to announce oneself before one makes comments. But the session, so that everybody knows, the session is being recorded.
Right, and will be available on the website.
And will be available on the website. I think that's the plan at the moment.
Okay, so is that okay for? Well,
That's fine.
you just have to watch your. Michael.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a great topic because it brings together all of the practice areas of the Institute. Every actuary should be involved because intergenerational change and equity, measuring uncertain future events is what largely we're all about. The issues are complex and very politicised, and therefore logic doesn't always prevail. And in my practice area of superannuation, we've had annual changes in tax and a lot of changes in social security since 1983, tax lump sums, and the system remains completely unstable. So I would expect more change, and that of course makes consumers very skittish about the value of superannuation. When I look at family households, there's been a major change over the last 2 centuries in the way generations have passed equity on. In the 19th century, it was property probably that got passed down, probably to the eldest boy, primogeniture and all the rest of it, but a large part of global wealth was land. The 20th century, it became monetarised, and it was common for people to build wealth and pass it through their families. But I think in the 21st century, there has been a bit of a change in the sense that educating children is really the wealth we give them. Far more people go to university, and preparing them to earn their own income in life is more prominent than it was in the past. And certainly retirees, many of them today, the frugal early baby boomers probably still want to leave the house to the children. And I think the next generation will think, how can we use all of our assets in retirement for ourselves? After all, our kids will be retired by the time we die, if longevity continues as it does, as it might. But I might just give you an analogy of superannuation to show you how complex the issues are. It's clear to me, what Grattan has said is said by others as well, that there's gross inequity in the concessions in superannuation, and these were largely exaggerated when Costello brought down tax-free benefits in 2006. He had the benefit of lots of surpluses, so he was able to give money away, but he's given it away in a non-sustainable way. And the difficulty of changing now is that you've got a significant baby boomer voting generation, that if you claw it back, you're going to have you're going to lose the next election. So it keeps getting deferred. So my premise is firstly that there will have to be bipartisan support for any significant changes, because there are winners and losers, and the opposition will always focus on the losers to score points. So you really need to try and neutralise the message. The reason the system is so inequitable is that there is no limit to what you can have in superannuation, and if you're smart, you should never pay tax in superannuation. I mean, I've had an SMSF for over 20 years, and I've had a refund every year. What happens if you invest in equities is you wait for a buyback. The buyback gives you most of it is a fully franked dividend, which you get the imputation credit, and you always get a big tax loss, because they give you a small capital base, and therefore you carry forward losses that wipe out any profits you make. And if you're not a day trader and you hold long term, as you should, when you get to 60, all of your deferred capital losses are made void, because you're suddenly selling in a tax-free environment. And that's but one of many opportunities, if you like. The transition to retirement allows people who are not working, people who are just making dividend earnings can now claim a $35,000 tax deduction because there's no longer a work test on superannuation. And you can, when you turn 60, you move all your money to a pension, even if you're still working, and you then draw down an income, and if you don't need the income, you just recontribute it back into the fund, and it actually creates a tax-free status. It's not all extra money. So you know, when you think about this, an SMSF, and there are 1 million Australians in them, really are just in a tax-free family trust. And you know, how do you unravel that without all those people becoming aggrieved?
Can I ask something to say that per se, and then we'll open it up for discussion?
Thanks. I just want to talk quickly about, I guess, the Institute's recent foray into the public policy arena with our paper. Kirsten Armstrong and I co-wrote with the steering committee, advising as well on health funding. So we've it really came out of the 2013 summit and this feeling that we had, as a profession, enough to say about health, but we wanted to stick to what we actually understood, and so kind of steering clear of anything clinical, but looking at sort of the financial side of it. So everyone's been talking about the expenditure side of health and how much it's going. Population ageing and sort of demographic influence is actually pretty small within that. But it's there, it's inexorable, and we were interested in, you know, not the expenditure side, but the impact that it has on funding and the intergenerational shifts as the shape of the population changes and people contribute you know, less through to government income tax and GST as they get older, and that burden being, you know, health expenditure kind of goes up by age, but your government contributions go down, and government's 70% of what your funding for health is. So because a lot of people are focused on expenditure rather than funding, that's what we wanted to look at. We haven't focused on efficiency gains or anything like that, because that's, again, that's not the point, and I think as you were saying earlier, the uncertainty is on the upside and the downside. We just don't know. So what we did in the paper is we've looked at households, we've looked at per capita expenditure, and then translated a household structure into a household expenditure, individual health expenditure, PHI, and government. And then we've looked at where money comes from to support each of those buckets, and how demographic change will shift burden from